Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Kinsevich, and this is our third video in Module 6 of our supervision training. We're talking about evaluating the student, and in this video, we're going to focus on summative evaluation. So summative evaluation is really that kind of end of semester or end of internship paperwork that you're going to fill out, and we're going to talk about working with the university. Generally, if your supervisee is still a student, then you're going to have to fill out university paperwork. And so here at Evangel, we have specific evaluations that we ask you to fill out for the student, and then they have to, you send it back to us, and the student's grade is attached to your evaluation. So it's important that it's not just kind of circling all the high numbers or all the low numbers, but really evaluating each part of what the student has done. You can also create your own summative evaluation. So we'll talk about that if you're working with, let's say, a PLPC, or just anyone who might be under your supervision at an agency or anything like that, to make annual or maybe biannual kind of twice a year type of thing, where you are providing them with feedback that is very specific, kind of on a rubric or a form type of thing. We'll talk about the self-evaluation as well as the supervisor evaluation and that summative evaluation process. And we'll talk about how to talk through that paperwork with the student or the supervisees. So let's talk about, in the case of the student working with the university, important to recognize that there are some roles here where we as a university are training these students. They are our students as well as your student. And so it's important to recognize what's your responsibility and also what's the student's responsibility, what's the school's responsibility. So, for example, as a university, we provide the forms to the students, or we may email you a link to a specific evaluation form to fill out. It's the student's job to make sure that they're reminding you about those things, telling you when the due dates are, when their semester is going to end, and that kind of thing. And if you're unclear, there's usually a point person, the professor who is overseeing the actual internship class or practicum class. And so that's your point person. You should have gotten an introduction from them and kind of some check-in emails along the way so that the lines of communication are open. And if you have any questions about the summative evaluation, it's great to ask. So again, use the forms, either paper or electronic, that the university provides to you. You can certainly add your own as well, but those the student will need to return to us. And if you find that you don't particularly like the summative evaluations, maybe some of the questions are unclear, or you have some other thoughts you'd like to share, then certainly giving that feedback to the program director or the instructor that you have communication with. We would certainly be open to that feedback as we continually revise our forms and evaluations. Timelines are important because university has specific schedules, deadlines for getting grades in. So if we're waiting on a summative evaluation from you, that can hold up a student's grade. So it's really important to know what those deadlines are. And again, it's the student's responsibility to communicate that to you. And if you're unsure, asking the student is the best way to do that, or that university contact person that you may have. Communicate often. It's certainly, we do not want to get a summative evaluation where there are concerns about the student that have never been communicated prior to that. So again, we have that open line of communication. It's important for you to reach out if you have a concern about a student, and email is usually the best way to do that. So let's talk about creating your own summative evaluations. Again, if you're working with PLPC or you're overseeing other counselors in an agency, then you would need to create this for yourself. And so again, set a schedule. Is it quarterly or twice a year, once a year, that you have a specific meeting where you have this form? Usually, the supervisee fills one form out, you fill out kind of an identical one, and then you're kind of comparing the self-evaluation and the supervisor evaluation. And there's specific criteria for what you're looking for. So that's where you're making the two versions of the same form. And some of the wording might need to be tweaked a little bit on each to make it, kind of in the appropriate voice and things. But every time a summative evaluation is done, you're doing that both, the self-evaluation and the supervisor evaluation. So you want to create specific categories, skills. What exactly is it that you want your supervisee to demonstrate? Are there specific skills or counselor dispositions, kind of a way of carrying themselves? Maybe there are specific client outcomes that you're measuring. And so if are uh, with non-identifying ways, you could say, okay, this many clients had a reduction of this much on the PHQ-9 or something. I mean, that gets a little bit more involved, but you could kind of aggregate the scores of the assessments that the clients are given and really look at the effectiveness of the counselor that way. It's important to use a scale that's easy for people. A scale of like 1 to 10 can be kind of a lot and broad range. Using a scale of, let's say, 1 to 4, having an even number of choices is helpful. If you have a scale from 1 to 5, then a lot of times people can just circle 3, which doesn't give you a whole lot of information. It's more of like the neutral answer. And so if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, that kind of can specify exactly what the rating is. And it may be helpful to note that maybe getting a 4 is, rare. So on the form, maybe they get 3 or 4 areas where they have a 4, and the rest are mostly 3s. And maybe there's a couple of 2s that they can work on. And so you don't want to just circle 4 down the line and say, oh, you're perfect at everything. It should be a thoughtful process. And it should be that if they're exemplary at something and that's a 4, then they're not exemplary at everything. And that indicates an area of strength. And then you want to have room on your form for additional comments as well. So some of that kind of subjective or narrative data you want included in there as well. And it's important to stay organized. So make sure you save all copies of your evaluations. That can help you later with if you have to write a letter of recommendation, or if you have issues down in the future, there's documentation of, kind of where these things have been evaluated and discussed. And then it's really important to just set calendar reminders so that you can ensure you don't forget and get those summative evaluations done in a timely fashion. So again, let's talk about this process. You're giving the supervisee their self-evaluation, and they should self-rate prior to seeing what you have rated them. So that's done independently on their own. And again, encourage them to think through each item carefully and not just rate all the same number, just like you're going to be doing. And that 4s should be maybe, that exemplary spot. 3 indicate they're on the right track. 2 is maybe an area of slight concern, and 1 is maybe an area of significant concern. So you can make sure those are labeled clearly and just help them understand if they don't get all 4s from you, that's not a bad thing. It should be expected. And then you should also complete your evaluation prior to seeing their self-evaluation. So before you hear how they are rating themselves, you're independently, carefully thinking through how you would rate them in each area. And you want to make sure that that evaluation reflects their strengths and their growth areas. And so that should be evident in the ratings. Make sure you include direct observations. So there may be a part of the form where it asks about specific skills, and you want to go back to, okay, when I observed this session, when I saw this recording, I noticed these specific skills. And, it's more firsthand information than just basing your evaluation on the self-report of the supervisee. And using comment boxes is a great place to give some of those specific examples. Then, after you've done that in a supervision session, you compare your evaluations. And so you have 2 copies of each, so you can both look at the self-evaluation together and hold that up against the supervisor evaluation and really talk through kind of line by line. Although if there's areas that you agree, you can kind of move more quickly through that. But if there's areas of disagreement, maybe you rated them a 3, they rated themselves a 4, or they rated themselves a 2 and you said they were a 3, kind of where are the discrepancies there, and kind of reflect on that so that it's clear kind of where those evaluations are coming from, why you rated them a certain way, or maybe hearing from them why they rated themselves a certain way. And so, again, just talking through the summative evaluation, there's some more specific points here. Again, observing what were those discrepancies between the self-evaluation and the supervisor. Was the supervisee too hard on themselves? I've certainly seen that where the supervisee rates them, themselves kind of low on everything because they think, well, I'm new, I'm not very good at everything. But they need to be looking at, okay, they do have some strengths. Are they able to identify them? Are they able to correctly evaluate and have self-awareness? And so if they're not self-aware, then that certainly can indicate a different problem. We want to ask questions, go through each section or item, ask them why they rated themselves that way, ask them to summarize their strengths and the things that they feel like they're still growing in. Identify highlights. So be prepared to say more. If the supervisee asks you, well, why did you rate me a 4 on that or a 2 on this? I thought I was a 4 and you have me as a 2. That's a big discrepancy. What happened there? And so being able to not be vague and say, well, I was remembering this specific, these couple of cases and how, that progressed. I thought you did really well on that. And maybe you're being too hard on yourself to say that that's a growth area. Or I really feel like you're still developing, let's say how you're writing your treatment plans. You've made some progress, but you're still, maybe getting them in late, or you're not completing your progress notes in a timely fashion. And that really needs to change and become a priority. And make sure that you are prepared to highlight certain things that you want to encourage with them or develop in them. So again, it can take a long time to go through every single question, but if okay, I really want to hit on questions 5 and question 30, then that can help, guide the discussion, and you've got that kind of marked on your paper ahead of time. And then it is important to note that if you need to amend an evaluation, that is something you can do, especially if there's a discrepancy. If the supervisee says, hey, I do not agree with this 2 that you gave me, or this 1, I really think that you are being too hard on me, or that's not fair, or you didn't see X, Y, or Z things. If they're upset about it or something, then certainly rather than just change it to make them happy, you want to write a note as to, they can certainly write a letter and include it in their file of why they disagree with that, why there was a discrepancy, or you might want to add a note. Maybe they needed to amend their self-evaluation because they were too hard on themselves. And so you can keep the first copy and then have them turn in a second copy, and both of you could write a note as to what the changes were about. And so that's just helpful to document the process and make sure it's clear. And so if you're turning it into the university, most of the time they're filling out a self-evaluation, and you're filling out the supervisor one, but you could bypass the step of talking about it, which I hope you don't do. I hope you print it out, take the time to talk through it with them and compare those. And so you'll have to talk to your student about that. Well, that is everything I have in this module. Thank you so much for watching. If you need anything, there's my contact info, and I hope that you have a great supervision process.